I've been thinking a lot lately about what conservatism actually is. In the simplest sense, one could say it's synonymous with traditionalism. The liberal may define it as that which is opposed to progress, whatever progress happens to mean on that day. However, there are deeper elements to historical conservatism, and because of the conservatives' love of tradition, it is, or should be, one of the few political movements that is deeply rooted to its historical version. Russell Kirk started a deep survey of conservatism in 1951 that culminated in his 1953 book, The Conservative Mind. In it, he traces the lineage of conservatism from Edmund Burke to George Santayana. In each chapter, he tells a story of the life and struggle of one or more conservative, of the radicalists he fought against in his day, and of the unique contributions he added to conservative thought. In the intro chapter, Kirk also outlines what he calls his 6 conservative canons. These are the connecting threads that he believes tie conservative thought together, united in opposition to radicalists. Insomuch as conservatism has an ideology, these canons may be it. While The Conservative Mind was a home-run bestseller and eventually saw 7 editions from 1953 to 1986, Kirk's canons themselves changed very little. In the final book he released before his death, The Politics of Prudence, he expands these from 6 to 10 conservative principles. I will present those 16 thoughts here, though as one might expect, there is much overlap between the first 6 and the next 10. Canon 1. Conservatives believe that a divine intent rules society as well as conscience, forging an eternal chain of right and duty which links great and obscure, living and dead. This is the canon that changed the most in later editions of The Conservative Mind, as Kirk was presumably trying to make the book more accessible to the non-deeply religious. By the 7th edition, it had become, conservatives believe in a transcendent order or body of natural law, which rules society as well as conscience. This canon rightly points out that most conservatives, through time, have been deeply religious. After all, spirituality is about as traditional as it gets. Most people in history, until the late 1700s, would have had difficulty distinguishing spiritual prominence in the form of a religious leader from political power in the form of a king. In most countries, the clergy had official status within the state, and the state had a state religion. Many of the rituals of monarchy and state center around symbolism and spirituality, with many cultures proclaiming divine right to rule, or even divine ancestry for their rulers. In Reflections on the Revolution in France, Burke rails against the French Parliament for defanging the French clergy and confiscating church land, an act that he felt was crude, base, and against the natural order of things. Modern conservatives have also been deeply interested in preserving or reviving a moral spiritual order and character in their nations. Is it possible to be conservative while not being religious? I believe it is, and I myself am not religious. For that reason, I do plan to make a video to that effect in the future. However, I do recognize how naturally conservatism fits with religion and spirituality. With regards to his later revision, we could say there is some transcendent moral law that all cultures try to imitate through their own customs, taboos, and moralities. To say that such a transcendent moral law does not exist would be to say that any act may be permitted, depending only on the context and culture in which it is committed. Canon 2. Conservatives have an affection for the proliferating variety and mystery of human existence, as opposed to the narrowing uniformity, egalitarianism, and utilitarian aims of most radical systems. This canon covers the idea that humans are different, and those differences are beautiful. A human raised in the countryside of Afghanistan will have different culture, customs, language, and needs than the humans raised in London. As such, trying to reduce human systems based on a set of simplistic axioms is myopic at best, disastrous at worst. Humans are not interchangeable and cannot be reduced to a number in a spreadsheet. Furthermore, the romantic and mythic elements of life enhance it greatly. Top-down systems devised by sophisters that disregard custom, culture, and the individuality of man in favor of a government based on some imagined rights of man will inevitably be rife with unintended consequences that only worsen human suffering. Canon 3. Conservatives have a conviction that civilized society requires orders and classes. If natural distinctions are unnaturally sequestered, oligarchs fill the vacuum. While equality can exist before God and law, attempting to equalize conditions on earth will only result in those delegated to be the equalizers gaining all the power. In the extreme, we can see this with attempts throughout the 20th century to institute communism. But we needn't look to such extreme examples to refute efforts at leveling. Ancient Athenian democracy was known for its particular foolhardiness and susceptibility to public feeling, as in when it voted to execute the entire male population of Melos and sell its women and children. The reason? They had refused to become subjects of Athens. Athenian democracy was severely refuted by both Plato and Aristotle, who would have had a first-hand experience with it. Any person who drew public ire was often executed, as Socrates was, and those with oratorical skill gained an inordinate amount of power, becoming demagogues. Aristotle advocated for the type of mixed constitution that lessened the evils of democracy by introducing orders and classes that could check each other's power. Putting political structure aside, conservatives argue for many types of associational orders and classes. The relation between a father and son, the relation between a subordinate and boss, the relation between a local government and state government, the relation between a priest and his congregation. Additionally, there are natural orders and classes, which are nothing more than the natural differences between people. Some people are motivated, stronger, more persistent, or simply have better genetics. Any attempt to level these natural distinctions out of some misguided feelings of fairness can only lead to more human suffering. Canon 4. Conservatives have a persuasion that property and freedom are inseparably connected, and that economic leveling is not economic progress. This canon is closely tied with the last, but is nothing more than a flat refutation of Rousseau and later Marx. Humans can and should own things. Not only do we take better care of the things we own, but without personal property, we become completely dependent on the other for our existence. In a society without property, our very existence depends on the superstructure that manages all possessions, which is how Leviathan becomes master of all. There is no such thing as a benevolent big brother that will control all resources and remain uncorrupted by that. Canon 5. Conservatives have faith in prescription and distrust of sophisters, calculators, and economists who would reconstruct society on abstract designs. This is the idea that the accumulated wisdom of hundreds of generations of humans is distilled in our traditions and far outmatches the wisdom that any single modern human could come up with. Kirk says, quote, "Custom, convention, and old prescriptions are checks both upon man's anarchic impulse and upon the innovator's lust for power." This, along with Canon 2, could be considered the core founding tenets of conservatism, understood as a type of traditionalism. We have traditions, and those traditions have taken us through many a crisis in the past. There is no particular need to propose a radical redesign of society. Humans haven't changed, so to radically change society, whose ultimate end is the well-being of humans, is foolhardy and rife with potential for unintended consequences. This leads into Canon 6. Conservatives recognize that change may not be beneficial. Society must alter, as prudent change can be the mechanism of social preservation. But in young Kirk's words in 1953, quote, "Innovation is a devouring conflagration more often than it is a torch of progress." A statesman must take providence into his calculations, and a statesman's chief virtue is prudence. Burke spoke often about prudence in the British Parliament. If some small change is found to be insufficient, it is much easier to expand the scope of law as needed than to decrease the scope after making too large a change. This is a meaningful corollary to Canon 5. If tradition is the most reliable guide for the future, it follows that change should be avoided where feasible, and any change should be looked at with suspicion by default. As many times as progress may be looked back on as having enabled human flourishing, Many times more, we may find that our present troubles are as a result of some past innovation now long forgotten. These are the 6 conservative canons as laid out by Russell Kirk. I think they're a pretty good first introduction to conservatism. For the rest of this video, I will go over his 10 principles from the Politics of Prudence, though I will spend much less time on each of them. First, the conservatives believe that there exists an enduring moral order. That order is made for man, and man is made for it. Human nature is a constant, and moral truths are permanent. We see this as analogous to his Canon 1, though he continues to shy further away from a direct proclamation about belief in a divine. Second, the conservative adheres to custom, convention, and continuity. This is a subset of his Canons 2 and 5, but more directly ties the conservative to traditionalism, rather than talking about a love of the mystery of life and a distrust of sophisters. Third, conservatives believe in what may be called the principle of prescription. This is a direct restatement of his Canon 5. Fourth, conservatives are guided by their principle of prudence. This is a direct restatement of his Canon 6. Fifth, conservatives pay attention to the principle of variety. At first glance, this sounds like his Canon 2, though being less poetic than his statements about variety and mystery of human existence. However, in the following text, we find that he really means it to be a restatement of his Canon 3. Namely, he means that humans should be accepted as representing many varieties, and should not be treated as one identical mass using some axiomatic abstractions or theories. Sixth, conservatives are chastened by their principle of imperfectibility. This is an important addition to his list of canons, and I'd gladly accept it as the 7th canon. The idea that humans are perfectible is a common thread in liberal thought. In its modern manifestations, it is the belief that humans are fundamentally good and are debased by society. It is the idea that the criminal has been let down by society, and so society should bear the punishment for his crime. You see this idea pop up in social contract theory with the state of nature, the idea that man without society has a character all his own. Locke believed this state of nature was one of freedom to order one's possessions and persons as one sees fit. Rousseau believed humans, while a blank slate, are also innately good and adverse to the suffering of others. He also believed that the existence of private property corrupts people into a fallen state of jealousy, envy, and self-consciousness. Conservatives reject this notion and rightly see human beings as flawed. Society is a civilizing force that in its best form is able to suppress man's innate selfishness, or better yet, to harness it for the good of all. In Kirk's words, to seek for utopia is an end in disaster. The conservative says we are not made for perfect things. All that we reasonably can expect is a tolerably ordered, just, and free society, in which some evils, maladjustments, and suffering will continue to lurk. By proper attention to prudent reform, we may preserve and improve this tolerable order. But if the old institutional and moral safeguards of a nation are neglected, then the anarchic impulse in humankind breaks loose. The ceremony of innocence is drowned. Seventh, conservatives are persuaded that freedom and property are closely linked. This is a direct restatement of his Canon 4. Eighth, conservatives uphold voluntary community, quite as they oppose involuntary collectivism. This seems to be a corollary of his Canons 2 and 3, as much as it is a statement of another important idea. In Kirk's words, quote, "For a nation is no stronger than the numerous little communities of which it is composed. A central administration, or a corps of select managers and civil servants, however well-intentioned and well-trained, cannot confer justice and prosperity and tranquility upon a mass of men and women deprived of their old responsibilities. In other words, community cannot be mandated or forced, it must be voluntary and organic. A conservative longs to strengthen the webs of local connection and to better the communities in which he takes part, whether that is church, family, local school, local government, or his neighborhood. Ninth, the conservative perceives the need for prudent restraints upon power and upon human passions. This is a corollary that follows directly from his Canons 5 and 6. One of the greatest dangers to human flourishing is the possibility for anarchy, where despotism inevitably follows. Conservatives seek to balance power to prevent any small group from gaining too much. 10th, the thinking conservative understands that permanence and change must be recognized and reconciled in a vigorous society. This is a restatement of his Canon 6. These are Kirk's ideas about the common threads of conservatism. Given the scholarly weight behind them, they hold up quite better than most. I think modern so-called conservatives need a major realignment in both their priorities and ideals. I also believe that we need a new conservatism that revives morality, community, and culture from the dregs it is currently in. I'll continue making this sort of content, so if you enjoy it, please subscribe. Likes and comments always help drive the algorithm as well. Have a good day. Until next time, this has been Jim John Jones.